Before we dive into these captivating stories, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to never miss our latest thrilling tales. Let's begin. I never thought a family camping trip could turn into my worst nightmare. Even now, 35 years later, my hands shake as I tell this story. It was the summer of 1988, and I was just 10 years old when my parents decided to take us camping in Oregon's Cascade Mountains. The excitement in our station wagon was electric. My little brother Tommy couldn't stop talking about fishing, while our German shepherd Amber hung her head out the window, her tongue flapping in the wind. Mom and Dad had picked a secluded spot near Crystal Lake, far from the usual tourist crowds. Looking back, that was our first mistake. The drive up was beautiful, with towering pines creating shadows that danced across the winding road. We passed the last gas station, and Dad joked about being officially off the grid. If only we'd known how those words would come back to haunt us. The campsite seemed perfect when we arrived, a clearing nestled between ancient trees with the lake sparkling just 50 yards away. We spent that first afternoon setting up our tent, collecting firewood, and enjoying the kind of family moments you see in commercials. But as the sun began to set, something changed. Amber, usually the most relaxed dog you'd ever meet, started acting strange. Her ears would perk up at random moments, and she'd stare into the dense forest, growling softly. Mom told me not to worry, saying animals probably lived nearby. But there was something in Amber's behavior that made my stomach twist. I remember sitting by the campfire that first night, watching shadows flicker across the trees, when I first saw him. A tall figure, just standing there, watching us from between the trees. When I blinked, he was gone. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that the figure had been my imagination. But Amber knew better. She barely touched her breakfast, instead positioning herself between our campsite and the tree line, her muscles tense and ready. It was around noon when he appeared again, this time in broad daylight. He emerged from the trees like he owned them, wearing dark clothes that seemed too heavy for summer. "Beautiful spot you've got here," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made my skin crawl. Dad tried to be polite, but I could see his jaw tighten. The stranger asked too many questions: how long we were staying, if anyone knew we were here, if we'd had trouble with our car on the way up. Amber never took her eyes off him, her growl a constant low warning. When he finally left, promising to see us around, Mom and Dad had a whispered argument. I caught words like leave and overreacting, but in the end we stayed. Dad said we couldn't let one weird encounter ruin our vacation. That afternoon, things got worse. Our cooler went missing, along with Dad's toolbox from the car. Small things, but they sent a clear message. We were being watched. The forest that had seemed so welcoming now felt like it was closing in around us. Every snapping twig made us jump. Even the birds seemed quieter, as if they too sensed something was wrong. As darkness fell, we huddled closer to the fire, telling stories with forced cheerfulness while Amber patrolled our perimeter like a sentinel. The third day brought rain, and a discovery that made my blood run cold. While exploring near the lake, I found fresh boot prints in the mud leading right up to where our tent had been the night before. Someone had been watching us sleep. When I showed Dad, his face went white. He checked the car, planning to leave immediately, only to find the engine wouldn't start. Someone had tampered with it, cutting wires and removing crucial parts. We were trapped. That's when the second man appeared. Unlike the first, who at least pretended to be friendly, this one made no effort to hide his intentions. He was shorter but muscular, with a face that seemed permanently twisted into a sneer. They stood at the edge of our campsite, the tall one, speaking while his partner fingered something in his jacket pocket. "Looks like you folks are having car trouble," the tall one said, his mock concern fooling no one. "Lucky for you, we know these woods real well. We could help, for a price." Mom clutched Tommy and me close while Dad stood his ground, Amber baring her teeth beside him. The air crackled with tension as both sides sized each other up. I remember thinking how strange it was that such a beautiful place could turn so ugly so quickly. The men gave us until sunset to make the right decision, then melted back into the forest like ghosts, leaving us with the growing realization that this wasn't just about robbery. They were playing with us. As darkness fell, the true horror began. They started with noises, whistling from different directions, twigs snapping just outside our light's reach, voices calling out with promises of what would happen if we didn't cooperate. Amber was our saving grace, her presence keeping them from getting too close. But even she couldn't be everywhere at once. We sat in our tent, a family of 4 pressed together, listening to our own breathing and the sounds of footsteps circling closer. Around midnight, they started throwing rocks, small ones at first, then larger. One crashed through our tent, missing Tommy's head by inches. Mom was crying silently, trying to be brave for us kids, while Dad gripped his hiking stick like a weapon. I remember the absolute certainty that we wouldn't survive until morning. The men's voices grew bolder, closer, describing in detail how they would take care of Dad first, then move on to the rest of us. Amber's barking became frantic, and we could hear her charging at shadows, trying to protect us from all sides. The worst moment came when we heard the zipper of our tent slowly being pulled up. Dad swung his makeshift weapon, connecting with something solid. There was a curse, a scuffle, and suddenly Amber was there, her teeth finding flesh in the darkness. The scream that followed would haunt my nightmares for years to come. But still, they didn't leave. Instead, they got angrier, promising that now they would make us suffer before the end. Just when all hope seemed lost, a miracle happened. The sound of an engine cut through the night, followed by the blessed sight of headlights sweeping through the trees. A forest ranger, making his rounds, had noticed the unusual activity. The men scattered like cockroaches, leaving behind only footprints and the lingering echo of their threats. The ranger, a bear of a man named Mike, couldn't believe what we'd been through. He called for backup and stayed with us until dawn, his presence finally allowing us to breathe. The following investigation revealed disturbing details. Similar incidents had been reported in the area, but the perpetrators had never been caught. They seemed to target families, playing psychological games before eventually robbing them, or worse. The ranger told us we were lucky. Some families hadn't been found for days, and their stories had much darker endings. Our car was repaired, and we left as soon as possible. Our perfect family vacation transformed into a nightmare that would stay with us forever. Amber, our brave protector, became even more protective after that night. She would sleep at the foot of my bed for years, getting up periodically to check the windows. Mom says she saved our lives, and I believe it. The way she kept those men at bay, giving them just enough doubt to prevent them from rushing us all. At once, she was more than a pet that night. She was our guardian angel. The years that followed were marked by changes in our family. Mom and Dad became more cautious, installing security systems and always checking locks twice. Tommy and I struggled with nightmares, jumping at shadows and never quite feeling safe in the woods again. Amber stayed with us until she passed away at 15, and even in her final years, she would sometimes growl at nothing, as if she still remembered that night and was warning us to stay vigilant. The incident affected each of us differently. Dad threw himself into self-defense classes, later becoming an instructor. Mom started a support group for families who'd experienced similar traumas in the wilderness. I developed an obsession with true crime, always wondering if I'd recognize our tormentors and news reports about other attacks. Tommy went the opposite direction, refusing to talk about it, pretending it never happened. But we all carried the weight of those terrifying hours, the knowledge that evil can find you anywhere, even in the most beautiful places. The police never caught them. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, still hunting families in the wilderness, playing their twisted games. The ranger told us they found evidence of a camp deeper in the woods, empty food cans, cigarette butts, and disturbingly, photographs of other families who had camped in the area. They had been watching us, studying us, long before we ever saw them. 20 years after that night, I did something that surprised everyone. I went back. With my own family this time, including a German shepherd named Phoenix, in honor of Amber. It wasn't about conquering fear. It was about reclaiming something that had been stolen from us. The lake was still beautiful, the trees still towering, but now I saw it all with different eyes. Every shadow held a memory. Every unexpected sound brought a flash of the past. We stayed just for a day, not overnight. Standing there, watching my children skip stones across the water where I had once played, I felt a complex mix of emotions. The terror was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but so was a sense of victory. Those men had tried to take something from us, our sense of safety, our trust in the goodness of strangers, our love for the wilderness. In some ways, they succeeded, but not completely. The mystery of who they were and why they chose us remains unsolved. Sometimes late at night I still think about them. Were we just random targets, or was there something more to it? The ranger who saved us retired years ago, but before he did, he told me something that still gives me chills. Other families had reported similar experiences in those mountains, spanning decades. Always two men, always playing the same psychological games. Like dark spirits of the forest, they appear and disappear, leaving only fear and questions in their wake. I still wake up screaming some nights, my hands shaking as I reach for my phone to check if anyone else survived. It's been 3 months since that camping trip, and the police still haven't found all the bodies. They don't believe my story. How could they? I barely believe it myself. But I need to tell you what really happened that weekend at Pine Ridge Forest. Maybe then you'll understand why I haven't stepped foot outside my apartment since I got back. Maybe then you'll know why I flinch every time I hear rustling leaves, or why the smell of campfire smoke makes me vomit. 5 of us went into those woods that Friday afternoon. Emily, my best friend since college. Marcus, her boyfriend, who planned the whole trip. Lisa and Jake, the perfect couple everyone envied. And me. We were celebrating Emily's promotion, one last adventure before she moved across the country for her new job. The weather was perfect, unseasonably warm for October. We found a beautiful clearing by the lake, far from the marked trails. Marcus said going off-grid would make it more exciting. If only we'd stuck to the regular campgrounds. If only we'd noticed the strange markings on the trees. If only we'd paid attention to that eerie silence that fell over the forest as the sun set. But we were too busy laughing, drinking, and reminiscing about old times to notice how wrong everything felt. Even when Emily said she heard whispers coming from the dark water, we just teased her about being scared. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came during dinner. Jake was grilling hamburgers when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence and stared into the woods. We all turned to look, but there was nothing there, just darkness between the trees. He swore he saw someone watching us, a figure standing perfectly still. We laughed it off, but Jake seemed shaken. He barely touched his food after that. Later, as we sat around the campfire telling ghost stories, Lisa noticed her camera was missing. We helped her search the campsite, using our phone flashlights to scan the ground. That's when Marcus found the first strange symbol, a complex pattern carved deep into a massive oak tree. It looked fresh, the wood still pale where it had been cut. Emily recognized it from somewhere but couldn't remember where. She kept staring at it, transfixed, until Marcus practically had to drag her away. The temperature dropped suddenly, unnaturally, fast. Our breath came out in visible puffs even though it was supposed to be a warm night. The fire seemed to shrink, casting weird shadows that moved in ways they shouldn't. Emily started humming something under her breath, a melody I'd never heard before. When I asked her about it, she said she couldn't remember starting to hum. Her eyes looked strange, unfocused. We should have packed up and left right then, but Marcus insisted we were all just freaking ourselves out. Besides, it was too dark to hike back to the cars safely. Around midnight, Lisa went to use the bathroom behind some bushes. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Jake called out for her, but there was no response. We grabbed our flashlights and spread, out to search, making sure to stay within sight of the campfire. I was checking near a cluster of pine trees when I heard the scream. It was Lisa's voice, but it sounded wrong, like it was being played backward through a broken speaker. We ran toward the sound, but it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Jake was shouting Lisa's name, his voice cracking with panic. That's when we found her shoes, neatly placed side by side on a flat rock. They were filled with dark liquid that looked black in the flashlight beam. Jake reached out to touch it, and Emily screamed at him to stop. She said she remembered where she'd seen that symbol now, in an old book about local folklore. It was a mark used in rituals, something about opening doors that should stay closed. Marcus tried to call 911, but there was no signal. We huddled together by the fire, watching the trees, listening to the strange sounds that seemed to be getting closer. Lisa's scream came again, this time from directly above us. When we looked up, there was nothing there but branches swaying without any wind. Jake lost it. He grabbed a flashlight and his pocket knife, charging into the darkness, shouting Lisa's name. Emily and Marcus ran after him, leaving me alone by the fire. That's when I noticed the symbol from the tree was now carved into every log we'd gathered for firewood. I hadn't seen them before, I'm certain of it. They seemed to pulse with a faint red glow that grew stronger as the fire died down. The sounds of my friends calling for Jake faded into the distance. Then I heard Marcus yell, a short, sharp sound cut off abruptly. Emily screamed his name. I stood frozen, torn between running to help and staying by the fire's light. The decision was made for me when I saw the first figure emerge from between the trees. It looked like a person, but wrong, too tall, too thin, moving in a way that made my eyes hurt. More figures appeared behind it, their forms shifting and twisting in impossible ways. I ran. I didn't even grab my phone or flashlight. Pure instinct took over as I crashed through the undergrowth. Branches whipped at my face, roots tried to trip me, but I kept going. Behind me, I could hear something pursuing. Not footsteps, but a sound like wet cloth dragging over leaves. I found Emily crouched behind a fallen tree, her hands pressed over her mouth to stay quiet. When she saw me, she grabbed my arm and pointed. Through a gap in the branches, we could see a clearing lit by an eerie green glow. What we saw there, I still can't describe it properly. The figures, the things, were gathered in a circle. In the center was what looked like a doorway made of twisted tree branches and darkness. Something was coming through. Marcus and Jake were there, but they weren't moving. They stood perfectly still, their eyes wide open and completely black. Lisa was nowhere to be seen. The symbols we'd found were now burning with that same green light, forming a pattern on the ground that seemed to shift and change when I tried to focus on it. The air felt thick, like trying to breathe underwater. Emily started that humming again, but this time her voice had changed. It resonated with the sound coming from the doorway, creating a harmony that made my teeth vibrate. She stood up suddenly, her movements jerky and unnatural. "They've been waiting," she said in a voice that wasn't hers. "They've been waiting so long. Everything happened so fast after that." Emily walked toward the clearing, ignoring my desperate whispers to stop. As she stepped into the green light, her body began to change. I watched in horror as her form stretched and twisted, becoming like the others. Marcus and Jake turned to look at me with those terrible black eyes, and I knew I was next. I ran again, but this time the forest itself seemed to be against me. Branches reached for me like clawed hands. Roots rose up to grab my ankles. The sound of that awful humming followed me, growing louder and louder until it filled my head completely. I could feel something trying to take control of my body, trying to make me turn back toward that clearing. Through sheer panic and desperation, I kept going. My lungs were burning, my legs were bleeding from countless cuts, but I didn't stop. I could see lights ahead, the campground's main parking lot, just a little further. Behind me, I heard Emily's voice call my name, except it wasn't really her voice anymore. It was something using her voice, trying to lure me back. I made it, to my car somehow. As I sped down the mountain road, I caught a glimpse in my rearview mirror, shapes moving at the forest's edge, watching me escape. I drove straight to the police station, barely coherent as I tried to explain what had happened. They searched the area for days but found nothing. No bodies, no strange symbols, no evidence of anything unusual. Just 5 abandoned camping bags and a cold fire pit. The official report says my friends got lost in the woods. They're still listed as missing persons. Their families still hope they'll be found. but I know the truth. Sometimes, late at night, I get text messages from their numbers, messages filled with those symbols, or links to videos of that humming sound. Last week, I saw Emily outside my apartment building. She looked normal, except for her smile. Too wide, too many teeth. When she waved at me, her fingers bent backward. I'm telling this story now because I know they're coming for me. The symbols have started appearing on my walls. I can hear the humming getting closer. If you're watching this, stay away from Pine Ridge Forest, and if you hear someone humming a tune you've never heard before, run. What would you do if a stranger, claiming to be a sheriff, approached you while camping deep in the woods? I didn't think much of it when my friends and I set off for a weekend getaway. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and laughter hung in the air like a sweet melody. We found a perfect spot beside a serene lake, far away from the city's chaos. As we set up our tents, a chill crept in, and I brushed it off as just the wind. That night, as we gathered around the campfire telling ghost stories, a flicker from the tree line caught my attention. I squinted into the darkness, my heart racing. "Did you see that?" I asked, but my friends laughed it off, claiming it was just my imagination. Little did we know, what was lurking there would change everything. Our laughter faded as we heard the crunch of leaves under heavy boots. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, tall, with a broad stance, and wearing a sheriff's badge that glinted ominously in the firelight. He introduced himself as Sheriff Dale, claiming there had been reports of strange happenings in the area. My gut twisted. Something felt terribly off, yet we were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nature's beauty. He insisted he needed to check our campsite for safety. As he approached, I noticed the way he scanned our supplies with unsettling intensity. My friends chuckled, enjoying the thrill of the unexpected encounter. But I felt a sinister wind blowing through the trees, whispering warnings I couldn't ignore. I glanced at the sheriff again, his smile stretching too wide, and suddenly, I knew this was no ordinary campfire story. The sheriff settled in beside us, leaning too close for comfort. He began asking questions about our equipment, our plans, and how long we intended to stay. I felt a tightening in my chest as he picked up my backpack, rifling through it without permission. "You boys should know better than to camp out here, alone." His voice dripped with condescension, and my friends laughed, unaware of the danger lurking behind his facade. My mind raced. Why was this stranger so interested in our things? His questions turned from casual to invasive as he probed about our families, our backgrounds, and our intentions for being in such a remote area. I wanted to grab my friends and run, but they were enraptured by his stories of law enforcement and local wildlife. The fire's light flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced around the clearing. While they were engaged, I caught a glimpse of a scar on the sheriff's forearm. "Did you get that while serving?" I asked nervously, my attempt to confront, him only seeming to amuse him. He chuckled, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "You could say that. Sometimes the job can get messy." The darkness felt thicker, pressing in on us as he leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing. I could see the reflection of the fire dancing in his pupils, but beneath the warmth, a coldness lay hidden. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but my friends were completely hooked on his tales. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding as I tried to think of a way to safely extricate us from this nightmare before it was too late. I glanced at my friends, their faces illuminated by the flickering firelight, blissfully unaware of the shift in the atmosphere. The sheriff continued his stories, but his tone had started to turn darker, more threatening. "You have to be careful out here," he warned, his voice low and gravelly. "Not everyone who wanders into these woods has good intentions. You might find yourself in a situation you can't escape from." His words hung heavily in the air, and I could feel the tension rising. I had half a mind to tell my friends to pack up and leave, but the sheriff's presence loomed large. He leaned back, his hands resting casually on his knees, but his eyes were locked onto mine as if he could sense my unease. "What do you think, boys?" he asked, glancing at my friends, his voice suddenly cheerful again. "Isn't it better to be safe than sorry?" The forced joviality didn't match the darkness in his eyes. My gut churned. Something was profoundly wrong. The fire crackled, and I felt the urge to get up and walk away, but my feet were glued to the ground. I had never felt so trapped before. My friends were laughing and joking, clearly enjoying the interaction, while I sat there, frozen in fear. I tried to play it cool, joining in their laughter, but my heart raced as I realized this was not just some harmless campfire tale. It was a warning, and we were dangerously close to the edge of something horrific. As the night deepened, the air grew colder, and the sheriff began to pace around our campfire, casting long, menacing shadows. My friends continued to chat and throw logs onto the fire, but I could hear their laughter dimming in the face of my rising dread. Something was definitely off about this man. Was he even a real sheriff? Doubts clouded my mind. I decided to do a little investigating myself. As the sheriff strutted about, I whispered to my friends, "Do you think he's really who he says he is?" They rolled their eyes, dismissing my concerns as paranoia. What's the worst that could happen? One of them laughed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched by more than just our new friend. When the sheriff turned his back to us, I seized the moment. Glancing at his sheriff badge, I noticed it looked cheap and worn. My heart raced as I realized that it had no official insignia or number. I reached for my phone to look up the local sheriff's department, but my phone had no signal in this remote area. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach as I looked up again, only to find him staring directly at me. "Everything all right, boys?" he asked, feigning innocence. I quickly shifted my gaze back to the fire, my mind spinning with anxiety. As I tried to figure out what to do next, I felt trapped in a web of deception. The sheriff was not just a creepy stranger. He was a danger we hadn't fully comprehended yet. Suddenly, the sheriff leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You boys should really be careful," he said, eyes glinting in the firelight. "Out here, it's easy to get lost, or worse." A cold shiver ran down my spine as he said the words. I could feel the air grow heavier, and my heart pounded in my chest. "Can I see that flashlight?" he asked, pointing to the one we had stashed nearby. My pulse quickened as I handed it to him. He flicked it on, blinding us momentarily, then shined it into the trees behind him. "You never know who might be lurking out there," he said ominously, and my friends laughed it off, not sensing the real threat. But I was frozen, too aware of how easily someone could slip into the woods and disappear. "What happens if we just went missing?" I blurted out, half joking. My friends shot me puzzled looks, clearly unsettled by my sudden change in demeanor. The sheriff laughed, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the trees. "Oh, that wouldn't be good at all. People could get very curious, you know." The way he spoke sent waves of dread cascading through me. This wasn't just a campfire ghost story. It was a chilling reality. Every instinct told me to run, yet my body felt anchored to the spot. The fire crackled loudly, but it felt like an insignificant flicker against the dark foreboding that enveloped us. Just when I thought the tension couldn't get any worse, the sheriff abruptly turned serious. "I'm going to need to search your things," he declared, the joviality stripped from his voice. My heart sank. "What?" I gasped, glancing at my friends, who were now staring at him in disbelief. "No, that's not necessary," I tried to assert, my voice shaking. But the sheriff took a step forward, confidence radiating from him like a dangerous aura. "Listen, kids, I'm just trying to protect you," he insisted, but his eyes sparked with something sinister. "People have gone missing in these woods, and you don't want to be next." Fear surged through me, and I could sense my friends were beginning to realize that this was no ordinary encounter. We were in danger, and it was escalating fast. "Let's just pack up and go," I urged, trying to keep my voice steady. But the sheriff shook his head, the smile fading from his lips. "You really don't understand, do you? You can't just leave." "Not yet." Tension crackled in the air as he loomed closer. My instinct screamed at me to fight or flee, but I was frozen by fear. I saw my friends exchanging worried glances, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm as the sheriff continued his ruse. "I can help you, but you have to trust me." The words felt oily on his lips, and I could see the truth behind the mask slipping away. This was not help. This was a trap. As the sheriff reached for my backpack again, everything within me snapped. "No!" I shouted. "Get away from us!" My friends, finally realizing the gravity of the situation, scrambled to their feet. Panic surged through the group and we backed away, hearts racing as we created distance between ourselves and the sheriff. For the first time, I saw real anger flash across his face. "You think you can just leave?" he hissed, his facade cracking completely. The woods felt alive, with a darkness, the wind howling through as if warning us. "I'm just trying to help you," he yelled again, but it was clear he was anything but helpful. We turned and ran, adrenaline propelling us through the underbrush, branches tearing at our clothes. I could hear his footsteps pounding behind us, the laughter from earlier replaced by the fury of a predator. My friends were shouting my name, but I could barely hear them over the pounding of my heart and the sound of my breaths coming quicker than I thought possible. Finally, we burst into a clearing that led us to a dirt road. We sprinted until we found a passing car, waving frantically as we pleaded for help. We escaped, but the image of the sheriff's twisted smile haunted my mind. Even now, thinking back on that night, I can still feel the chill of his gaze and hear the echo of his chilling words. Even in safety, I'm left wondering, how many others has he approached? And how many never made it out of those woods? The fear still clings to me, a reminder that sometimes the real monsters wear badges. Have you ever been jolted awake by something so terrifying it feels like your heart stops? It was just past 1 a.m. when I was ripped from my deep sleep. A gut-wrenching scream pierced the stillness of the night. It wasn't just a scream. It was the kind of scream that freezes your blood and makes every hair on your body stand on end. I lay there, my heart racing, trying to comprehend what was happening. The darkness of the tent closed in around me, amplifying the sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, distant hoots of owls, and that unending scream. I wondered if I was dreaming, but the cold sweat on my brow said otherwise. I was camping with friends, miles away from civilization, surrounded by too many trees and too much silence. The scream echoed again, closer this time, sharp as a knife. Fear wrapped its icy fingers around me. I had to move. But where? Should I peek outside? Or should I just lie there, paralyzed by the unknown? The choice clawed at my mind, and I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. With my heart still pounding, I forced myself to sit up. The interior of the tent felt stifling, as if it were closing in on me. My friends were oblivious, deep in their dreams, snoring softly. I glanced toward the entrance, swallowing hard. If I wanted to survive this night, I would need to find out what was happening. I slipped my phone from my pocket, but the screen's glow didn't provide the comfort I sought. It only highlighted my surroundings, leaving shadows dancing around me. The scream jolted me from my thoughts again, this time a piercing wail that felt as if it came from the very depths of hell. There was no denying it. Someone was in trouble. My mind raced with questions. Who was she? Why was she screaming? As dread enveloped me, I resolved to quietly unzipping the tent. I braced myself against the fabric, my breath hitching in my throat. Each second felt like an eternity. With a trembling hand, I pulled back the zipper and took a deep breath, ready to face whatever horror awaited me outside. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap to the face. I scanned the area, my eyes straining against the darkness. The campsite was eerily quiet now, the forest holding its breath in anticipation. My heart pounded louder than ever, every thump echoing in my ears as I moved cautiously, stepping over roots and uneven ground. The scream had ceased, replaced by an unsettling silence that amplified my fear. I felt exposed, like prey in a predator's sight. What if the girl needed help? Where did her screams come from? I felt a primal urge to call out, to break the silence, but something held me back. What if I attracted something sinister? The moonlight barely illuminated the path as I ventured deeper into the woods, the trees looming like sentinels around me. Each crack of a twig underfoot made me jump, my imagination spiraling. Just then, I heard a rustling nearby. Was it her? Or was there something else hiding in the shadows? Panic surged through me and I hesitated, wrestling with my instincts. I strained to listen, focusing on the faint sounds around me. My heart raced, caught in a tug-of-war between curiosity and fear. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of something, white darting between the trees, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a dress, torn and dirty, flapping in the wind like a ghostly banner. The sight sent chills down my spine, and I hesitated, grappling with the decision to follow it. Images of the girl screaming flashed in my mind, and a desperate urge to help her washed over me. I stepped forward, heart pounding against my ribcage, moving cautiously toward the source of the movement. Each step felt like a leap into the unknown, fear mixing with adrenaline. As I pushed deeper into the woods, I noticed the trees seemed to be closing in on me, the darkness thickening. Suddenly, I heard soft whimpering like a wounded animal. It sent me into a panic. I hurried toward the sound, praying it was her. What if I was wrong? What if it was something far worse? I felt the weight of dread press down on me, forcing me to confront my deepest fears. As I neared the source of the whimpering, the air grew thick with an unsettling weight. I pushed through the last line of trees and found myself in a small clearing, moonlight casting an eerie glow. There she was, a girl curled up against a tree, her dress tattered and soaked. Relief flooded through me, but it was quickly replaced with confusion and terror as her wide eyes bore into mine. "Help me!" she gasped, pointing tremblingly into the darkness behind her. My instincts screamed for me to run, but I stepped closer. "What happened?" I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're coming," she whimpered, her finger still pointing into the shadows. "They won't stop until they find me." Just then, a rustling erupted behind her and I froze in place. The girl's face twisted in terror as she whispered, "Please, you have to run." A sudden realization hit me like a freight train. Whatever was in those shadows, it wasn't human. My heart raced as I turned to flee, the very air around me crackling with danger. I shot back into the woods, every instinct on high alert, but there was something heavy behind me, something relentless. My legs propelled me forward, fueled by raw adrenaline. I could hear it now, heavy footfalls crashing through the underbrush, closing in fast. The chase ignited a primal fear within me, an instinct to escape at all costs. I glanced back for a fleeting moment, and my stomach dropped. Something dark and distorted emerged from the shadows, moving with unnatural speed. Panic clawed at my throat as I zigzagged through the trees, branches snagging at my clothes, urging me to falter. Every sound behind me felt like a hot breath, whispering of doom. I had no time to look back again. I needed to focus on survival. My heart pounded like a war drum, drowning out all rational thought as I pushed deeper into the wilderness. I thought of my friends, blissfully unaware at the campsite, but there was no turning back. A surge of terror gripped me, and I stumbled over a root, falling hard to the ground. The footsteps grew louder, echoing in my ears. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in quick gasps. Desperation fueled my flight, but the dark presence behind me only grew closer, its intent clear. I could feel its gaze, a predatory hunger as it chased me through the trees. At last, I broke free of the trees and stumbled into the campsite, panting, heart racing. My friends remained asleep, unaware of the horror I'd just escaped. I glanced back, but there was nothing behind me, just the vast dark of the forest. My mind raced. Had I imagined it? Had I really encountered something sinister? I sat on the ground, trembling, trying to calm my breathing. The girl's warning echoed. In my mind, they won't stop until they find me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me back. I fumbled for my phone, heart racing, desperate for any illumination. The screen lit up, casting a weak glow when I finally dared to look around. I felt a chill creeping over me, and as I turned, I saw it. A shadow moving near the tree line, watching. I froze, heart in my throat, unable to process what I was witnessing. I was terrified, realizing this nightmare wasn't just a fleeting moment, it had followed me. And in that chilling moment, I understood. We are never truly alone. The darkness holds secrets, and sometimes what we can't see is far worse than anything we can. Have you ever encountered a sound so eerie, so otherworldly, that it sent chills down your spine? My passion for camping in the great outdoors was forever altered after a harrowing experience in Blackwood Forest. The events of that fateful night still linger in my mind, making every glimpse of a tent induce a shiver. The haunting memory of that creature continues to invade my dreams. And now, at last, I feel compelled to share my unsettling tale. It was supposed to be a simple solo camping trip, just me, my tent, and 3 days of peaceful solitude. I'd picked a remote spot, about 6 miles from the nearest trail, the kind of place where you can really disconnect from the world. The first day was perfect. I set up camp, gathered firewood, and watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, but as night fell, something felt off. The forest was too quiet. You know how the woods are usually filled with the sounds of birds, insects, and small animals? There was nothing, just an eerie silence that seemed to press in from all sides. I should have known then that something was terribly wrong. Around midnight, I woke up to what sounded like someone, or something, walking around my tent. The footsteps were wrong. They didn't follow any pattern I recognized. It was like hearing someone trying to imitate walking without ever having seen how it's done. The rhythm was all wrong, the spacing inconsistent, and the sound itself was unlike anything I'd heard before. A wet, squelching noise accompanied by something that sounded like claws scraping against rocks. I lay there, perfectly still, barely breathing as whatever it was circled my tent. My flashlight was just inches away, but I didn't dare move to grab it. The creature would stop occasionally, and I could hear what sounded like sniffing, but the noise was distorted, like it was being played through broken speakers. The worst part was when it would make this sound, a high-pitched whine that would suddenly drop to a deep, guttural growl, all in the same breath. The creature's behavior became more aggressive as the hours dragged by. It started pressing against the sides of the tent, creating bulges in the fabric that would slowly move from one side to another. I could see its shadow cast by the moonlight, but the shape made no sense. It seemed to constantly shift and change, like watching a balloon being twisted into different forms. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the creature could hear it. The temperature inside the tent dropped dramatically, and I could see my breath forming small clouds in the darkness. The thing outside started making new sounds, sounds that still give me nightmares. It was like hearing someone try to speak, underwater, but mixed with the clicking of insects and the cry of a wounded animal. And then it started mimicking human voices. At first, it was just fragments of words, distorted and broken, but then I heard it clearly, my own voice calling out for help. That's when I knew I couldn't just lie there anymore. I had my hunting knife and the flashlight, and I knew I needed to make a decision. The creature had been testing the tent's fabric, pushing harder and harder, and I could hear the seams starting to strain. The zipper of my tent began to move, slowly, deliberately, as if something was trying to figure out how it worked. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the knife. The sound of my own voice outside was getting clearer, now mixing with other voices I recognized. My mother, my best friend, even my deceased grandfather. They were all calling out to me, begging me to come outside. But each voice was slightly wrong, like a corrupted audio file trying to play through damaged speakers. The zipper was halfway up now, and I could smell something. A sickly sweet odor mixed with the unmistakable stench of decay. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I lunged for my flashlight, flicked it on, and pointed it at the tent opening just as the zipper reached the top. What I saw in that beam of light defies explanation. The creature was there, but my mind couldn't, still can't, process what I was seeing. It was like looking at a reflection in broken glass, where all the pieces show something different but somehow form a whole. Parts of it seemed to absorb the light while others reflected it like mirrors. Its form was constantly shifting like smoke in the wind, but with solid parts that moved independently of each other. The only consistent features were these eyes, dozens of them, all different sizes and colors, blinking out of sync with each other. And they were all focused directly on me. The sight was so overwhelming that I screamed, and the sound seemed to trigger something in the creature. What happened next is a blur of pure adrenaline and terror. The creature lunged forward and I slashed blindly with my knife. There was no impact, no resistance. It was like cutting through cold air, but the creature recoiled anyway, emitting a sound that I can only describe as 1,000 violin strings snapping at once. I didn't think, I just moved. I burst out of the tent, running blindly into the dark forest. Branches whipped at my face, roots tried to trip me, but I kept running. Behind me, I could hear it pursuing, that weird, uneven gait getting closer and closer. The worst part was that it kept using those voices, now screaming in panic and pain, using the voices of everyone I loved. I ran until my lungs felt like they were on fire, until my legs were numb, until I couldn't run anymore. I eventually made it to the ranger station, though I still don't remember exactly how. When they found my campsite the next day, everything was exactly as I'd left it, except the tent. It was shredded from the inside out, like something had exploded from within it. But here's the detail that still makes my skin crawl. They found no footprints around the tent, not even mine. The rangers said it was probably a bear, but I know what I experienced. To this day, I sometimes hear those footsteps in my dreams, that uneven, impossible rhythm. And sometimes when I'm alone at night, I swear I can hear voices calling to me from the darkness, perfect imitations of people I know, but with something subtly, horribly wrong about them. I don't go camping anymore. In fact, I don't go anywhere near the woods. Because I know that somewhere out there, that thing is still wandering the forest waiting for another tent, another victim, another voice to add to its collection.